Hi there. Over the months and years, as you are more than aware by now, I like to Dutch with a view to trading out in running. And I've shown you a number of different mechanisms you can use to green up. I typically have an automated green up process because I think you get better results by doing that rather than predefining where your get out is and putting a bet in the market. But there's a number of ways that you can configure that automation. I've advocated principally in two ways in the past. Either a set target profit of, let's say, 25% of your overall stake, so that's a level set profit for irrespective of the race that you get into and irrespective of your Dutch that you're doing. Alternatively, there's a variation on that where you have a variable trade out, which again is based on a 25% target profit, but that target profit takes its setting from the maximum green available to you should you let the Dutch carry on through to its conclusion without trading out. In other words, the potential profit for the Dutch. And if you employ that mechanism, you will get, assuming that the trigger point is reached, you will get differing profits from race to race to race. That variable green up automation is actually available for download. If you go to this link here, click on that link, it'll open up in Microsoft OneDrive, and if you go to the Fairbot strategy files and scroll down near the bottom, there's 4 variations on a theme which you're free to download and play around with if you wish. What I'm going to do in this video is actually look at something different, a different philosophy, if you like, with regard to the greening up, which I would argue is actually more sensible in many respects. But I'm going to go back to sort of first principles first of all to explain the greening up process from an automation point of view, and that'll just let you see where I'm coming from and my way of thinking for this particular methodology. So we'll just get rid of that and we'll go into Fairbot. Okay, we're looking at the first race today. I've got the refresh rate set to very, very slow so that the numbers aren't chopping and changing all the time. And let's just look at the greening up or the trading out process for just one runner. So I'm going to use a stake of £100 in each of these examples. So you'll see if I just submit that, we have £100 on this first runner here with a maximum of profit of £210. And if we're looking at a 25% profit, in other words £25, this runner in its race will have to drop down to 2.5 in order to hit that profit target and thereby trigger the green up process from the automation. Nothing significantly unusual about that. So just keep a mental note, it needs to go down to 2.5. Now if I clear all those numbers away and pull up the Dutching dialog again, consider if I was to do 2 runners now. Still the same stake, £100. But the thing to note here is that our £100 is now split. We're £55 on the first and 44 on the second. So ignore this runner here for the moment. If this runner was to make the 25% mark, remember he was going down to 2.5. He now, by virtue of the fact that there's less money on him as a back bet, he has to go down all the way to 25. Sorry, 2.18, beg your pardon. Now, as far as trading out as this Dutch with 2 runners involved, if this runner here throughout the race remained sat at odds of 4, if this runner comes down to 2.18, that's all well and good. This runner will trade out for £25, this runner will trade out for 0, and that's it. You've met your target. However, that's unlikely to happen. Ideally, what you might want is this runner will drop in odds and this runner will drop in odds at the same time during the race, and consequently combined they will hit a point where the 25% or the £25 in this case is hit, so they don't have to go down as far. However, the other extreme, of course, is this runner right at the start of the race decides he's not going to run, doesn't come out the stalls, and he shoots out to 1,000. So that means that this runner here now has to recover the £25 target profit and the £44 that's sitting on this runner, which means he's going to have to go down to 25 plus, let's just call it 45. He's going to have to come way down here below 1.4 before the Greenup process is triggered. Now that's obviously going to get worse. That's obviously going to get worse the more runners you have involved in your Dutch. So once again, if I pull up the Dutching tool, and let's just do, for the sake of argument, the first 4 in the market, you'll now see our overall stake of £100 is spread quite thin. And as you saw from that previous example, the amount of money on the favourite is lessened yet again, so he's going to have to drop down still further, assuming these other ones decide not to run. So the more runners you have involved in your Dutch, generally speaking, the longer you need to let the race run in order to have the possibility of one of your runners dropping low enough to not only meet your target profit, but to recover the money on all the other runners. In addition to that, one also has to consider what is happening in the background as far as Fairbot is concerned. As that race is progressing, when the trigger point is met, assuming that it does get met, Fairbot has to calculate the get out point or the trade out values for each of these runners, whether they're in the green or whether they're in the red. And those ones that are in the red, since the race is rapidly drawing to its conclusion, will be drifting, and they will likely be drifting fairly rapidly. So when that Greenup process is triggered and the bets are fired into the market, you may find that any one runner's individual share of that green out process might not get matched. In other words, the more runners you have in your Dutch, the more difficult it is to get a clean green up, simply because some of those runners will be drifting and drifting too rapidly for the bet submission process to keep up. So when you're Dutching, and I've said before, I wouldn't want to put more than 4 runners in a Dutch if I'm going to be trading out in running. And even then, 4 runners is marginal. If you are going to put more than 4 runners, I would just leave it as a bet. So say for example I wanted 5 runners in there, I say okay, this Dutch will get me £8. If one of those runners wins, I'll lose the 100 if the other ones lose. So in other words, the more runners I have in a Dutch, the more likelihood I am not to try and trade out. So I always typically tend to limit my Dutch to 2 or 3, very occasionally 4. Now, if I go back to what I said earlier on, typically I've been giving you a 25% trade out trigger point. That's what I've been using for months. There's another option available to you, which may actually be more sensible, and that is to have multiple different green-up positions, and those positions are based on the number of runners you have involved in your Dutch. So for example, if you have a race where you only have one selection, rather than looking for a 25% profit, you might, for example, look for a 40% profit. Now, if you recall this first one, even just with 2 runners in the Dutch, if I pull up this one again and submit that, a 40% profit is going to be down here, which is still not as low as it needed to go when there was 2 runners involved for a 25% profit. So you may want to set up a mechanism whereby if you have 1 runner, you're looking for, let's say, 40%. If you've got 2 runners, your trigger point will be 30%, 20% and 10% through 3 and 4 runners respectively. And that's a fairly easy automation to set up. The only thing about it, however, is that you need a number of different rules, all doing the same. Unfortunately, there isn't a calculation method where you can say, right, okay, I've got 4 runners, give me 40%, yada, yada, yada. You can't calculate it on the fly. So you actually have to set up a number of different rules. And this is a simple demo of that. You set up 4 different rules, all essentially doing the same thing, except that it's going to green up when it hits the £40 trigger point, 30, 20 and 10. But it's also dependent on the number of matched bets you have. So you submit your Dutch in advance. If you've only got the 1 matched bet, it'll green up. This one will green up. These 3 won't, because those conditions aren't met, and so on. And that's how you would go about it. You could obviously expand that if you really want to have 5, 6 runners in your Dutch. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do. Just put in some extra rules. And there you have it. A very simple process. I've been testing this particular type of mechanism this past week. And I'm beginning to like it more and more. So it may be worthwhile having a go. I'll drop this demo in the download section for you to save you actually having to edit it, and you can play about with these numbers. Essentially, there's nothing much needing doing. You just need to change that number there if you want to play around with that, and change the market bet count in here. Make sure you've got those set to 1, 2, 3. If you add in additional rules, make sure you add the corresponding one in. And that's it. That's a very simple automation that you can use. Obviously you can use it as it is, just like that, or you can incorporate that in the bottom of any other automation that you might be using. Okay guys, have a wee play around with that, see what you think. Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, like and all that jazz, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.